and we're back with Legends of Lake Howell. Today, our Lake Howell legend is none other than Anthony Pyatt. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, sir. Thank you for having me.
So I hear that you have a new exciting project coming up. You want to tell us about that project?
I do. July 12th on Disney Plus, Descendants: The Rise of Red is coming out. For fans of Descendants, that'd be the 4th film installment, not including the Royal Wedding cartoon.
Is there anything that you can share with us about the upcoming film?
Yeah, I can say that. I mean, I might be a little biased, but I think it's going to be one of the best ones yet for anything you were a fan of before, with the music and the dancing and what characters are enemies and what characters become friends. It's all of what we had before plus a little bit more, so it's really exciting.
So how did you get involved with this film?
With this film?
Yeah.
Well, as a working television film actor, you know, the standard grind is in between your day job, you get emails from your agent that say, hey, you have an audition, drop everything right now and do it. They don't tell you drop everything right now and do it, but if you're on top of your stuff, you probably should. And an audition came through for something called Pocket Watch. And, you know, you do all the research you can of the directors and everything, and submit your tape and send it off into the internet, and then you forget about it. And whenever you get a call back, you know, it's like, oh, you know, it's like a cherry on top. And for this one, I had to do one line, like over the course of the whole audition to booking it, about 8 to 10 times. The first time also involved a singing clip and a dancing clip, and then there's a callback, and then there's the retapes, and then you get the call from your agent when you're in the middle of Target, and they're like, I have big news.
So have you been involved in any other projects before this major project? Tell us about some of those projects that you've been involved in.
Oh, yeah. So I've been working on television film probably close to about 9 or so years now. I will say that I feel like I've only been taking it super seriously the past year or two. And that's just my own personal journey. It takes a lot of practice. It takes you know, basic equipment at home. It takes getting in the groove for what your brand is and what they're looking for. But I've been lucky enough to do some really fun commercials around Florida and Georgia, and a couple of short films here and there. And then most recently, this is just after Descendants, about 2 months ago, I shot my first television episode, which was loads of fun, Will Trent on ABC and Hulu. And it just aired a couple of weeks ago.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
All right, so do you look for certain roles when you are, I guess, looking for a job? Are there certain roles that you look for in terms of television or film?
That's a good question. I operate under a belief that you should say yes to as much as possible, because even I got this advice from Paul Dano when I was like 19. I was in a phase of very much asking anyone and everyone I could for advice. And his advice was that, because he was like, you know, you'll be surprised that working on things that maybe feel further from what your dream is, or like what you want to do within the realm of what you're doing, will somehow find you closer to what you want to do. And so luckily, I'd say I have a good relationship with my agents where they are encouraging, where they're like, you know, if there's a reason you really don't, you know, want this job or it doesn't work for you or something, like, talk to us, you know, feel free to say no, you have that power. But otherwise, most auditions come in and I'm cranking for it. And then of course, you know, I hold on to my aims and dreams and aspirations of like what kinds of projects I want to work on. And, you know, I hope rolling the dice on this work that, you know, maybe I build enough of a platform that those jobs will become accessible to me eventually.
So what inspired you to go into acting? Is it something that you always wanted to do, or you just had an opportunity and you said, gee, this is something I like doing, I'll stick with it?
A lot of answers for that. I believe deep down, you know, the reasons have evolved as I've evolved as a person, but from start to finish, it's always been seeking genuine connection. I've always loved and had a spark with the feeling of connection with other actors as we're telling a story, the connection with the audience as they empathize with the story. It means different things to different people. It starts conversations, it rattles cages, it allows people to feel things, or at the very least, it's escapism. People can wonder what if for an hour or a half hour or 2 hours. And then I would say that fully exploded right here on this stage during high school. I was lucky enough at Lake Howell, where at the time our theater teacher was James Brendlinger. And what I remember looking back within our thespian district is that based on budget and other things, I'm sure, like some high schools would do like a couple of productions a year and they would be big and there'd be a lot of pressure around it. We had more, I would argue, quantity than quality, but here's why this was good. Because, in high school, it's never going to be a masterpiece. Like, that's where you roll up your sleeves and you get dirty and you make mistakes and you explore. And not only did we get many chances per year, if I remember correctly, I think we were doing something between 9 to 12 productions a year.
It's almost a play every month.
Yeah. And that's really, I mean, not to get on a soapbox about it, but like even as an adult working actor, like working constantly at it is the key. You gotta, Daniel Kaluuya and Bill Hader have videos you can find online where they talk about like sucking at it is essential, and the sooner you get comfortable with that, then you can get past it and start getting good at it. And so, we were able to just try a play and put it on, and we would have wins, and then we would make mistakes and move on. And also, James Brendlinger was a really special teacher in that he had unique vision as a director. Like, he had ideas and we would help bring them to life. So it wasn't just like, we're going to always do the cookie cutter shows and we're going to do them exactly as they were done before. Like, he'd be like, we're going to do Shakespeare in space, or, Brat Pack, the 90s, stuff like that. So there was a lot of exploration there, and I think that really lit my fire, and it just never stopped. It sort of snowballed from there.
Any play in particular that you remember from high school, or something that you liked?
Tons.
With Mr. Brendlinger?
Oh man. I'm not good with favorites questions, so I'll have to give you like top
Just
five.
give me a couple.
Yeah. What comes to mind was there was a really cool production where we did Romeo and Juliet through history of theater. So every scene was representing a different iconic spot on the timeline of theater, starting all the way back with like the thespian origins, like Greek origins, and we went through different like time eras as well as like stylistic eras, and then by the end, I think we were like in the future at some point. But we had 4 Romeos and 4 Juliets, so that it would logistically work to have costume changes and set changes for every different era, so that the play could keep moving and people weren't sitting through Romeo and Juliet for 4 hours. And he found really clever ways to have them all exist together and come together and then come apart. Some of the most crucial moments where Romeo and Juliet meet, they had all 4 of us. I was one of the Romeos. We would all meet at the party at the same time, and spoiler alert, when Romeo drinks the poison and dies, and then Juliet wakes up a second later, there was a really cool staging where we choreographed like all 4 Romeos like tilted the bottle at the same time, stumble, 4 bodies hit the floor, 4 Juliets wake up, and like I get like chills thinking about it to this day. It was a really cool idea, and I'm really proud that we did that in high school. And then the other one that comes to mind was I got a chance to do Zoo Story with my buddy Drake Polino, who I believe is now a professor, I think in Gainesville, last I checked, like a father of a daughter. Our buddy Dylan directed it, so it was just 3 of us. And, polar opposite of that Romeo and Juliet story where like, we're getting rid of all the frills, we're getting rid of the huge ensemble, we just get to focus on these two characters and why are we telling this story, what's going on for each of them from start to finish. It was the first time I think a director ever asked me to like make a journal for a character, or like every day he would ask us a new question like describing the character. So that was one of my first times getting to sink my teeth into character work, which I love doing.
You mentioned practicing earlier. How do you practice? What is it that you do? Is there technique, or what goes into that?
Well, there are so many different skills involved, and I will say, like as a sideline to that, like being an actor is awesome because, like, let me go bigger than that. If you're in this creative industry of any kind, there are so many transferable skills to other jobs. So it's nice to be able to practice all of those. I will say auditioning often is my practice. It's become fun. Like, I don't know what commercial work looked like 10 years ago, but a lot of times I get an audition and essentially you're being asked to create a 10-cent version of what the commercial will be in your living room. And so it becomes this fun challenge where you're just having a day and you have some hours free, and then suddenly you get an email that goes, you need to make this short film and here are the parameters, go. And you have to set up the lighting and you have to set up the costume, you have to figure out the character and memorize the lines. And so it's small enough that you can like bite into it, edit it together, send it out, and those come along often enough, thankfully, at least in my experience. So that it helps with practice. And then as for like, a lot of people ask like about memorizing lines and repetition, really. I mean, for me, I think everyone is different, like finding what works best for you is the key. I find in the way that you listen to like music and it can get stuck in your head, I will oftentimes record an audio version of the lines and then play it over and over and over again until I get the rhythm. I always personally do all of the lines, not just mine, because it's easier to understand what you're saying if you know why you're saying it, what you're responding to. And then I was taught, and I do keep this practice, where I make those recordings with little to no inflection so that I'm not just practicing how I'm going to say the line every time. I can know what the story is and what the words are, and then, let it come honestly, like when we call action.
So how do you prepare for a role? You've got this role, and then there's this character. How do you study the character? How do you put your own like personalized touch to it?
Well, now you're getting into method. There are a lot of different methods actors use. Me personally, I not to repeat myself, but I like to understand the story as a whole. I go, I guess, from macro to micro. If I understand what the story is and why we're telling it, now I start to understand where I fit into it. Find out this person, like where they're starting and where they're ending, what they want, and
so it's not just about that character, it's about the big picture so that you understand the whole concept of the film.
I think so. I mean, otherwise, what are we doing? It'd be a little selfish, like, everybody watch me, I'm going to act now. It's the reason we get hooked on shows and we binge them, or why, we remember the movies we see or something, because it touches us in some way or it makes us think. And then, in short, my training that I stick to is you do all your work in advance, you find how it connects to you, and then you be honest. Which is not too it's not too dissimilar from life, in that, like, I have all of the pre-work, which is knowing where I come from and who I am and everything behind me, and then I sit in this chair and now I'm having a conversation with Mr. Michael Howard. And I didn't plan how I'm going to say any of these things. I'm just being honest with all of that history behind me of who I am, and that's the same thing for character work.
So in talking about history and how you prepared to be here at this stage, at this point, what advice would you give to an aspiring actor or actress?
I was thinking about this on the drive here. I knew you were going to ask me that. I have a couple of pieces of advice. I always say whenever anybody asks that more than talent, more than looks, more than resources like money or who you know, resilience is like the number one thing you need to do this. Because everyone gets a turn if you stick around long enough. It's just how it works. You know, there's always going to be somebody, you know, who you consider to be more talented or more attractive or has something more than you or has something you don't. But no one's going to walk into the room with your laugh, with your passion, with your opinions. And if you stick around long enough, you know, you're going to get something. And you know, that's why they say, like, if you can picture yourself doing anything else and being happy, do that, because it's tough. But if you stick to why you love it, you know, it comes around. There's like a lyric, Childish Gambino, Donald Glover says it in one of his like older songs where like, he's like, I made the stuff that I wanted to make, and you know, people enjoyed it. He's like, you know, because there are people out there that are going to relate to you in one way or another. So yeah, resilience. And then it's important. I want to make sure I get it right. I think you should get familiar with what makes you comfortable and happy and foster that. I used to say live where you're comfortable because the hustle's really hard. And if it's a struggle to live where you're living, it's going to be even harder to stay resilient. But now I'm realizing, you know, as my life marches on, that, you know, depending on what it is you want to do with this, like it's going to require some willing discomfort in a healthy way. And so if you understand the things that really bring you back to earth, you know, if it's like the places you love to eat, who your friends are nearby, how you like to travel, what your hobbies are. If you have those things you can come back to that have nothing to do with acting, then you can have more in your cup to give when it asks for it, and it will ask for it all the time.
So speaking of coming back, you're back here at Lake Howell High School. If you could describe your experience at Lake Howell in one word, what would that word be?
One word.
Or several words. Just describe your experience at Lake Howell.
I'd call it explorative. I don't have a better word for molding.
Molding, okay.
Yeah, but you know, there are a lot of things, obviously, between the ages of about 14 to 17, 18 that you really start to understand, like, who am I and who are my friends and what matters to me. Thankfully, Lake Howell was a place that made room for that, I think.
So you mentioned that Mr. Brenlinger, and it's true, you had a play almost every month that you were here. Did you have time to do any other extracurricular activities?
Yeah, my whole life I've liked to dabble. I started here in chorus. That's not a unique story. There were a lot of people that start in chorus and find their way to theater. There's probably some science behind that. I did some chorus. I believe I did JROTC for a moment. And I think I dabbled in culinary a little bit. And is getting voted a homecoming king candidate an extracurricular activity?
Yeah.
That was a surprise. It started as a rumor, and then it became true. They're like, wouldn't that be hilarious? Wouldn't that be like silly crazy? And we had no idea that we were discovering how voting works. We all just got on the same page, and then it happened. Yeah, I like to get around.
Other than Mr. Brenlinger, who had a big impact on you, were there any other teachers that you remember that had a great impact?
3 come to mind. Got to mention Mr. Dyson, who's no longer with us. I remember all 4 years there were a different science. In order, it was biology, chemistry, physics, and then anatomy, physiology. Academics wasn't always my strong suit, but physics I got for some reason, and
Okay.
I do attribute a good chunk of that to, I guess, Mr. Dyson's teaching style. And to those who don't know, towards the beginning of the following school year after I had him, he passed away, and we all had the bracelets, from Mr. Dyson and everything. So I'm grateful for all the ways that high school is confusing and overwhelming, and you don't fully grasp like how much of this matters in life and how much of this matters right now. What does it mean to me if I'm bad at chemistry, or something like that. He made that one click, and that was nice, and I appreciated him for his time, and I'm grateful that I got an hour out of his week towards the end of his life, and I had no idea, and that was really lovely. Mr. Wilk was my chemistry teacher, and he has always been a lovely person. I appreciated that he had such a candor in the classroom, it was one of the breakthrough moments that you start to dip your toe into, I'm not a kid and I'm becoming an adult, and then you start to see that the adults are people too, and you're like, oh, that's a person, and his job is chemistry teaching.
Right, yeah.
And since then, he's been super supportive. He stays in touch. There was a moment in time I was exploring teaching. I was teaching at Full Sail Labs for a while, and the more I was exploring that idea, I reached out to him and picked his brain about being a teacher, and he was super gracious with that. So I appreciate the seed he planted then, so that we can have a relationship now. And last but not least, I had Miss Fiorica as American history, and that was my senior switch day. She let me teach history for a day, and there was a lot to be gleaned from just being on the other side of the desk for a day. And she was really gracious and open-minded about that.
The last question, and that question is, we're sitting here in Lake Howell's auditorium, and if you could go back in time and give yourself one bit of advice, what would you say to yourself, knowing what you know now?
All right, buddy, in 2024, you're going to vote on the Kansas City Chiefs for the Super Bowl? Just trust me. It's going to work out really. Invest in a high-yield savings account.
Yeah.
Start early. And also, all money aside, I would say trust your gut. It's important. Yeah, it's easy to ignore, but you know what is right for you more than you give yourself credit for, which I think is a hard thing for any teenager to do, because you haven't just had a lot of years on your feet trusting your gut. And there is an expression from Julia Cameron from The Artist's Way. She says, leap and the net will appear. Which I think is another way of that, like George Clooney quote that gets around where they say courage doesn't come after the thing. I would say, dive in and trust that it's all gonna work out. Be bold.
Be bold. And we're in with that. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Howell. This was fun.